The Blue Plaque walk round the centre of Holmfirth was the culmination of some 5 years' preparatory work by members of the Holme Valley Civic Society, supported by the Holmfirth Local History Group. On April the 13th, 2011, our then local Member of Parliament, Jason McCarthy, officially launched the Holmfirth Blue Plaque Walk. He is seen here with Alan Tinsdale in the centre of the Holmfirth Local History Group and Brian Hinchcliffe of the Holme Valley Civic Society. There are 12 blue plaques on buildings of historical interest in and around the centre of Holmfirth. A free leaflet giving details of the buildings and a map of the walk is available from the Tourist Information Centre at Holmfirth Public Library. The walk is circular and can therefore be joined at any point, but the Civic Society suggests that visitors begin the walk in the Crown Bottom car park, where there is ample parking for visitors' cars. It's found next to the Pioneer supermarket. Then proceed in a clockwise direction round the centre of Holmfirth, visiting each building in the numerical order shown on the leaflet. Crown Bottom, at the start of the Blue Plaque walk, looks very different today than it did, say, 100 or even 50 years ago, when this part of Holmfirth was the focus of a great deal of industrial activity, as this picture, taken in 1926, clearly demonstrates. In this photograph, probably taken at about 1900, we are looking across to Crown Bottom, and the large building in the centre background is Albert Mill, of which today only the name and date, carved in stone, survives on display in the Crown Bottom car park. Compare this view of Holmfirth, again probably from about 1900, with the Holmfirth gasworks clearly shown. Compare it with the scene as we recognise it today, with the car park and the Pioneer Co-op supermarket. Being one of the few flat areas in the centre of Holmfirth, Crown Bottom was a natural meeting place for crowds, as we see in these two photographs of a meeting of members of the Wesleyan Church in about 1910. Notice too, in the background of these images, the industrial buildings which have long vanished. In 1912, there was a suffragette meeting at Crown Bottom, and the suffragette addressing the crowd is a Mrs. Selina Cooper from Nelson in Lancashire. She was well known within the movement as a powerful orator. As the Holmfirth Express reported of this meeting at the time, she held the attention of the large audience which had assembled. And this audience seems to be giving her a fair hearing, which was not always the case at suffragette meetings. Note, in the top centre of the photograph is the Druids Hall, which will be building number 4 on our walk. As the textile industry slowly fell into decline after the Second World War, so many of the buildings from Crown Bottom which supported the textile industry were pulled down, leaving a rather untidy, unkempt area for several years. And in this picture of Crown Bottom, of particular interest is the large building seen in the left-hand corner of the picture. This was once the Wesleyan Chapel, and like many other Victorian buildings in Holmfirth, it was pulled down during the 1960s and 1970s. Here we see the building in all its glory. And here, being demolished, and we can see also Crown Bottom is beginning to take on the role as Holmfirth's major car park. Today, many will still remember Crown Bottom in its manifestation as Holmfirth's open market in the 1970s. And here, in the background, Albert Mill, not long before it was demolished to make way for the Co-op supermarket. So, leave Crown Bottom and proceed up School Lane to the Huddersfield Road and Blue Plaque Building number 1, the Drill Hall. The Drill Hall was built in 1891 to meet the growing needs of the 2nd Volunteer Battalion, West Riding Regiment. The origins of this battalion lay in the Holmfirth Volunteer Rifle Corps, established in 1860, which itself was part of a nationwide volunteer military force with the capability of defending the nation if needed. The building was financed by public subscription, and its rooms were also therefore available for other public, political or educational meetings. At the outbreak of World War I in 1914, members of this battalion were amongst the first men of the valley to take up arms. The regimental memorials to those who died in the Boer War and the First World War were placed in the entrance to the hall. Before leaving the Drill Hall, here is another picture taken from the archives. The view is properly in 1915, and it shows Holmfirth soldiers setting off in trucks supplied by Albert Mill. Was this the first leg on the journey to France and the trenches? The next stage of the Blue Plaque walk takes us a little further along Huddersfield Road, past the fire station. On the corner of Huddersfield Road and Bridge Lane is building number 2, the Technical Institute, or College. This was built by public subscription and opened in 1894. Its task was to provide technical and manual education outside the then existing elementary school system. Youngsters would attend there in the evening after completing their day's work in the mills. Following the Education Act of 1902, the Institute, which up to then had been managed by volunteers and local businessmen and mill owners, passed into the administration of the West Riding County Council. From 1902 until 1932, it provided accommodation for Holmfirth's first secondary school, although technical classes continued in the evening. In 1959, it became a further education centre. But at the moment, in 2018, the building has stood empty and unused for several years, but hopefully a brighter future beckons. The single-storey annex, attached to the rear of the building, was at one time Holmfirth's police station. Another archive picture from the beginning of the 20th century shows the college in the foreground. To the right is another view of the late Albert Mill, and behind the tall chimney, the Victoria Hotel, which has also disappeared. In the top left corner, we can see Holmfirth Railway Station, a small remnant of which we shall pass on the way to the almshouses, Blue Plaque number 3. To reach building number 3, the almshouses, we continue along Bridge Lane. Just over the River Holme, we pass on the left another surviving link with Holmfirth's industrial past, namely the foundry of J and J.W. Longbottom. For almost a century, this specialist manufacturer has produced cast iron rainwater products, gutters, rainwater fall pipes and fittings, ornamental heads and cast iron ancillary items, using traditional methods of manufacture. It is one of the last, if not the last, which can still produce these iron fixtures for traditional buildings where more modern plastic fittings would be quite out of place, or where listed status forbids their use. Longbottom's does not have a blue plaque, but perhaps it should. Just past the entrance to the foundry, a lane, now called Somervale, leads off uphill to the left and to an estate of new houses. This lane was once the access road to the goods yard of Holmfirth Station. Note the massive stone wall on the right, built to support the station site above. Continuing up Bridge Lane to its junction with the New Mill Road, we pass a modern house on the left. This was built on the site of the demolished Victoria Hotel. The Victoria Hotel was built close to the railway station, presumably to offer accommodation to those who would start to arrive in Holmfirth by train after 1850. But too, in more recent times, like so many Victorian buildings in this country, it was seen as something of an eyesore and was demolished in 1971. So alas, no blue plaque for the Victoria Hotel. This picture, taken in 2018 at the junction of Bridge Lane and the New Mill Road, shows the modern house which has taken the place of the Victoria Hotel. And just behind it, a brand new house nearing completion in 2018, situated right at the very end of the Holmfirth branch railway line. In fact, this modern house was built on top of the site where, in railway days, there was once a turntable, where locomotives could be turned round for the return journey back to Huddersfield and Bradford. This image too shows the railway line at its very end, with the Victoria Hotel in the background. Respecting the wishes of the owner, no blue plaque was placed on the station master's house, almost the last remaining evidence of Holmfirth's more than a century-old railway link with the outside world. The first train arrived at Holmfirth on the 1st of July 1850. The line closed to passenger traffic in 1959 and to goods traffic in 1965 as part of the beach enclosures. The branch was built by the Lancashire and Yorkshire as a double track from the junction at Brockholes, indicating probably that in those days of railway mania, the original investors had hoped to extend the line further southwards towards Holm Bridge, and perhaps drive a tunnel under Holm Moss, thus creating another cross-Pennine route to Manchester. For whatever reason, this ambition was never realised, and throughout its life, Holmfirth remained the terminus of the branch line. This extract from the 1895 timetable shows that Holmfirth enjoyed a service to Huddersfield and Bradford approximately every hour, from early in the morning until late at night. After the Second World War, the bus offered a more convenient and attractive service to most people living in the Holmfirth area, and passenger trains dwindled to just a few a day, until inevitably in 1959 they ceased altogether, although the railway was still popular for a while for excursion trips to the seaside and holiday specials. After the final closure of the line in 1965, the iron rails were removed and the track bed between Holmfirth and Brockholes Junction was abandoned back to nature. This was the track bed in about 1900, leaving Holmfirth on the left and making its way through Berrybank Woods towards Thongs Bridge, and the identical scene in 2003, when nature rules. And again, the same scene today, where the track bed was cleared once again, this time for houses, which can be seen following the curve of the line towards Thongs Bridge. But luckily, the Tudor-style station master's house still survives as a listed building, although difficult to imagine now that trains once drew up outside the still existing platform. A section of the track bed still survives in Berrybank Woods, perhaps because it's too difficult for developers to reach and exploit. The main platform area of the station was demolished when the site was bought by the Jehovah's Witnesses, and, with the help of thousands of followers, they razed their church from the ground to completion in one weekend. And this is the situation today. The station master's house, standing in splendid isolation, pictured from what is now the car park of the Jehovah's Witness Church. Close by, one other building from the railway era still survives, although in much altered form. The goods depot has now been converted into an almost unrecognisable private house. So a few yards further up the hill from the old station, we come to the blue plaque building, number 3, the almshouses. The building of the almshouses came as an indirect result of the catastrophic flood which afflicted Holmfirth in 1852, when Bilberry Reservoir gave way and sent a tsunami tidal wave through the centre of the town. The damage was almost on a biblical scale, destroying homes and businesses. 81 people lost their lives, their bodies being swept downstream to Lockwood and beyond. One body is thought to have reached Pontefract. A national distress fund was set up to help the surviving victims. Almost £70,000 was raised, a colossal sum at the time, equivalent to several £1,000,000 today. When all the claims of the victims had been met, some money from the fund remained, and to this was added a further £1,000 raised by a local bazaar. There was much discussion as to how the disaster should be commemorated. Some favoured a monument, others a dispensary for the town. But almshouses won the day. The foundation stone carries the following dedication: to the poor of the townships of Holme, Austenley, Cartworth, Wooldale, Upperthong, Netherthong and Honley, forever. A short walk back down the hill towards the centre of Holmfirth brings us to blue plaque building number 4, the Druids Hall, or, as it's known today, the Masonic Hall. This Regency-fronted building is one of the most impressive in Holmfirth. It was built in 1846 for the ancient order of Druids at a cost of some £2,000. The origins of the ancient order of Druids are still largely mysterious because much of the original source material from the time of its foundation has been lost. However, it is known that it was founded in 1781 in London, and it arose at a time when the idea of voluntary societies and clubs was becoming particularly popular in the country. These benefit clubs collected membership fees into a central fund that they used to care for members who were too ill to work or to help pay for their funerals. Other similar welfare clubs existed, for example, the Oddfellows. In this picture here, we see Winston Churchill being installed into the order at Blenheim Palace in 1908. In 1851, the Druids in Holmfirth had a membership of some 590. Where they found the money to fund the building of the hall is something of a mystery. It's been a very adaptable building, and it has played host at different times to the United Methodist Reformed Church, the Holmfirth Volunteer Rifles, a meeting place for the early socialist movement, and as an entertainment venue. By the beginning of the 20th century, the Friendly Society movement was in decline, and the membership of the Druids had drastically fallen. In 1906, the remaining membership decided to offer the building for sale at public auction, and it then took on new existence as a hotel and a fully licensed public house with a brew house attached. It continued in this form until 1917, when the local Masonic Lodge, in need of a larger premise, purchased the hall for some £700. £2,000 was then spent on refurbishing the building, suggesting that it was in some state of disrepair when the Masonic Lodge bought it. Thus the Druids Hall, now known as the Masonic Hall, has been the home of Holme Valley Masonic Lodge number 652 since 1921. In recent years, the interior of the building has undergone further alteration. 2 offices on the ground floor for commercial let were created in order to generate income to help towards the considerable costs of maintaining such a large building. Space upstairs also serves as one of the venues for the Holmfirth Art Festival. After more than a century and a half, it still seems to retain the air of mystery which has surrounded it since it was built. Just a few yards downhill from the Masonic Hall is our next blue plaque building, number 5, once the home of Bamfus, the famous photographer and filmmaker. In its heyday, it was one of the most important industries in Holmfirth, producing slides and postcards on an almost industrial scale. But once Bamfus closed down in the late 1990s, the building seemed to have been abandoned and left to decay. It seemed, indeed, in imminent danger of collapse. But luckily, just in the nick of time, it seems to have been rescued and is at the moment undergoing an extensive renovation, so that in 2018 or 2019 it will enjoy a brand new existence with new owners and new occupiers. The last of the summer wine wasn't the first time that Holmfirth citizens had seen cameras of various sorts on their streets. At the end of the 19th century, James Bamfirth, born in Cartworth in 1842, was already well known in Holmfirth as a photographer, postcard maker, artist and filmmaker. In the 1890s, the magic lantern was a popular form of entertainment, and Bamfirth produced coloured slides on a massive scale for these lantern shows. By 1914, his sales catalogue had reached 577 pages. Many of the lantern side stories contained a moral message, as here, the perils of the demon drink being a popular theme at a time when the temperance movement flourished. In some slides, James Bamfirth himself is the model, here playing a schoolmaster. Whilst the background to most of these slides was a painted indoor set, James did occasionally venture outside. Here, for example, a scene shot at Back Lane, just behind the factory, with the same setting today. Not much changed. One of his earliest and most famous films, shot in 1899, was The Kiss in the Tunnel, perhaps filmed locally at the tunnel in Thurstonland. Many of his short comic films featured Winky, a sort of slapstick Holmfirth version of Charlie Chaplin. The outbreak of the First World War in 1914 sadly brought the filmmaking venture to an end, since many of the chemicals used to produce film were now needed for the war effort. But as one door closed, another opened, the war creating a vast new market among departing soldiers for picture postcards, particularly those offering sentimental songs and images of lovers saying goodbye. Again, as with his films, local people were often the models for these postcards. In the interwar years, yet another lucrative postcard market was created and opened up by Bamfirth, that of the saucy seaside postcard, with its near-nautical double entendres. These continue to find a ready market today, although Bamfirth is no longer in business in Holmfirth. Creator of many of these saucy postcards in Bamfirth's later years was Arnold Taylor, seen here in his office at Bamfirth. Continue a few yards downhill from Bamfirth to Town Gate, and then turn left up the narrow, cobbled Daisy Lane to find blue plaque number 6, the Old Towser, just past Daisy Lane Books. Some consider this building to be the oldest surviving in Holmfirth, although this is controversial, dating from the late 16th century. It was built as a lock-up to house those whose unruly or otherwise offending behaviour fell foul of the church authorities. In this early jail were confined the socially unacceptable, drunks, vagrants, debtors and thieves, waiting to receive their just punishment. Perhaps a period in the stocks on Town Gate, a public whipping, or perhaps a fine. Unfortunately, there are no records surviving from this period in history. In the 17th century, early Quakers were held here before being sent to the castle jail in York, usually for the non-payment of the church tithe or for non-attendance at church services. In 1680, the Reverend Edward Robinson, curate and priest of Holmfirth, was confined in his own jail for the crime of coin clipping. He was taken to York, imprisoned and sentenced to hang. The old Towser probably ceased to be a lock-up at the time when Holmfirth Police Station, with 3 holding cells, was opened in 1857. After this, the building variously served as the home for the fire engine, the horse-drawn ambulance, and even as Holmfirth's mortuary. Today it stands empty and opens usually once a year during Heritage Weekend in September. For the next blue plaque, go past the foot of the church tower, then down the steep tithe steps into the churchyard. Pass round the front of Kay's Ironmongers and left up Dunford Road to find plaque number 7. For safety reasons, this plaque is set high up on the wall of the shoulder of Mutton Public House, but it marks the pump hole on the opposite side of the road. This blue plaque is the only one of the 12 which commemorates an individual, namely Harold Wagstaff. He was in fact born a few yards up the road in Underbank, but the pump hole was chosen for the plaque because this was where Harold began his career in rugby football. He started playing at the age of 14 for a team of local lads called the Pump Hole Rangers. Talent scouts from the big clubs heard about him and he was signed up to play for Huddersfield when he was just 15. He went on to be selected for Yorkshire and England when he was 17. He represented England in 12 Test matches and was captain of the 1914 and 1920 overseas touring side to Australia and New Zealand. Regarded as one of the game's greatest players, he was included as one of the original 9 members of the Rugby Football Hall of Fame. In the 100th anniversary of Rugby League, his portrait appeared on the 19p postage stamp. To find blue plaque number 8, cross the Dunford Road and take the narrow cobbled alleyway which runs along the back side of the Aldir restaurant. Here we find the Nook. It was established as the Rose and Crown in 1754 and rebuilt during 1819, but for generations has been known as the Nook and the area around it as Back of the Nook. And in fact recently the name was officially changed from Rose and Crown to the Nook. Today it also has a prize-winning brew house. Difficult to believe today, but this narrow cobbled alley was once the main highway through Holmfirth, crossing Higham Bridge and then merging into the present-day Hollowgate where the cobbler's shop now stands. Although many residents of Holmfirth will remember this little shop in an earlier manifestation as a place where cheap cuts of tripe could be obtained. Continue along Hollowgate, Holmfirth's ancient main road, to find blue plaque number 9 high up on one of the buildings on the left. It marks the site where, from the 18th century to the 20th century, 3 fairs were held annually, and also, for a while, it marks the site too of Holmfirth's Beast Market. At the far end of Hollowgate, close to the old bridge over the River Holme, there is another one of Holmfirth's ancient pubs, the Elephant and Castle. look closely to the left of the main door to find a little plaque commemorating yet another catastrophic flood which damaged Holmfirth. This one was in 1944 and is sometimes called the Forgotten Flood because it happened just a few days before D-Day and there was a total clampdown on any kind of publicity. Any walk round the centre of Holmfirth should surely reflect its rich heritage in the textile industry, with at least one blue plaque on a mill building. Unfortunately, most of the mills which once stood close to the centre of town, Albert Mill, Holmfirth Mill, Newfold Mill or Brickerton Mill, have vanished, leaving barely a trace of their existence. So, our blue plaque number 10 is placed, of necessity, on the surviving former 5-storey mill building at Lower Mill, now converted into flats. All this other mill buildings have been replaced by domestic housing. Lower Mill suffered considerable damage in the 1944 flood. These pictures show Lower Mill in its glory days, with the view from Prickleton looking over onto its weaving shed and the 5-storey building, now flats. And here, the same view as it exists today in 2018. Retrace your steps from Lower Mill back to the bridge by the Elephant and Castle. Just across the bridge, on the left, is blue plaque number 11, the Toll House. This bridge was, until 1844, part of the main route through the township of Holmfirth. But after that date, Victoria Street was developed with a new and wider bridge built across the river, replacing Hollowgate as the main through route. The Toll House, which was established to collect fees for the Huddersfield to Woodhead Turnpike Trust, also lay on the Shepley Lane head to Greenfield Turnpike. One of the original milestones from Turnpike days still survives in good condition on this bridge over the River Holme. In the second half of the 19th century, responsibility for maintaining roads was handed over from the turnpikes to local authorities. And from that point onwards, the Toll House has fulfilled a number of roles: a butcher shop, a cafe, a very popular bookshop, and at the moment it is the home of the Fair Trade Centre. Make your way back along Hollowgate towards the centre of Holmfirth at Victoria Square. Cross the road and walk down the lane by the side of Charland's butcher shop, noticing on the wall side there the marker showing the height of the water during the 1852 catastrophic flood. A few steps past the butcher shop, we come to blue plaque number 12, the Picturedrome. Built on a garden at the side of what was once Alden House and is now the Old Bridge Hotel, this purpose-built cinema was originally called the Holme Valley Theatre. It bears the date 1912 on the front of the building, but the first performance was held on Easter Saturday, 1913. This was Holmfirth's second cinema, the first being the Picturedrome, and this was situated at the bottom of Dunford Road, now the site of an Asian restaurant. The original seating capacity was over 1,000, but this was reduced in 1952 to about 800. In the early days, the projector box was situated outside the cinema. Electricity for the lighting was provided by a gas engine in an outbuilding, and the projectors were probably cranked by hand. Film and concerts continued until 1967, when demand declined, and after closing, the cinema reopened 3 months later as a bingo hall. The bingo hall closed down too, and there followed a period when the building was empty and neglected. But in November 1998, after extensive renovation, the Picturedrome reopened as a cinema and concert hall, so the building lives on and is more or less true to its original purpose today. Inside the Picturedrome, it is worth looking up to the rather fine and unusual ceiling. It is made of decorated tin plating. The first talkie shown at the cinema was Sunny Side Up in 1930. It starred Janet Gaynor, Charles Fowle and Marjorie White. And that concludes the Blue Plaque walk round Holmfirth. Return to your starting point at Crown Bottom by following the footpath along the river, doffing your hat where necessary to the Holmfirth heron, who is frequently to be found on duty at this spot. I hope you have enjoyed this saunter round the town, and that you have found something, apart from compo and wrinkled stockings, to engage your interest. A visit to our website offers much more information on the history of Holmfirth. Visit www.holmfirthhistory.org.uk.